Hi, so in this video I'm going to be going over the demo scene from the Radio and Morse Signal Communications pack. Alright, let's jump right in. So you can see in the game view we have the player's UI for this radio, like this handheld radio. This gives you the slider interaction or interface with the radio. And I'll kind of show you where that plugs in just a minute. And then this is for the test receiver. So this is just a mock-up receiver. Just a standalone station. In this case I have the transmitter part completely disabled, and it's just a receiver. You can, in the game once it's running, you can interface with this or interact with it, turn this on and off, you can move these sliders and all that good stuff. So let's jump right in. We got the Morse broadcast station is one of these stations back here, these two towers, and then we've got a little guy back here that'll do some signaling with the flashlight. For the Morse broadcast station, it's got a radio component, and we've got the transmitter enabled. We've got a max effective range. So this is similar to like the wattage or the power of that radio transmitter. So in this case, it's 10,000 blender unit, or not blender units, Unity units, which is effectively in meters. The band selection range, this locks you in on this. You can't select anything, even in editor mode, that isn't within that range. And if you notice, if I change this, it changes what that was. It also changes the frequency that's supported for that band, and then it also sets the top end limit as well. That I can set higher. I can set that to whatever. If I put more than there are to select, then it just puts it at what the maximum value that you could select would be. So in this case, I could select all the way up to that, but I couldn't go below 4. So it just locks it into a range. In this case, we'll just go to 0. And also of note, you notice, I don't know if you noticed, but like if you select something that has multiple frequency ranges, then you get channels. And in this case, you got channels. Like in the case of CVs, these are locked in. Each channel has one frequency, so you can't change that frequency. Okay, let's go back to where we were. So that was the 160 meter, and we went to 2 megahertz. For that. Okay, and then down to the transmitter part for the Morse code. So this transmitter actually sends the transmission of it. In this case, we're sending it to a radio. As I'll show you on the flashlight guide, we have a visual, and you can also do an audible, which we'll have on the player. For the Morse code auto emitter, you get word per minute calculated by either Paris or codex methods. This is adjustable live, so if you change this while the game is running or while the application is running, it will actually recalculate your words per minute and change how fast that it emits the Morse code. The broadcast delay is the time in between these messages. So it'll be the time that you delay for the start of the very first time playthrough, but then also the delay in between each playthrough. The number of times to send, -1 just means it sends infinitely. And anything else is how many times it's going to send. The text to send, this supports standard as well as non-standard, English as well as non-English, standard, ITU standard Morse code alphanumeric characters, as well as prosign. So any of the prosign, and there's a list of prosign if you look in the frequency lookup. It has all of the code lookup. It has all of the actual letters and symbols and characters, non-English characters, and prosign that's available. And for prosign, it also gives their description. And there's some other information in here as well, places you can look up on Wikipedia about the Morse code and prosign. Okay, so back to the game view here and back to this. Okay, and then for the sample rate and the frequency, the sample rate is just what you would, this is the 44100 is good for most microphones and computer speakers, that type of thing. And then the 880 is A5. I just happen to like the sound of that, but you can set this to anything you want. Be mindful though, if you set it too low, you get some really weird audio sounds or distortions. It doesn't work with the speakers very well sometimes. And if you set it too high, it can be really, really annoying. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. We have our radio station shed. It's another one of these guys back here. Same thing with the radio. This one is on 1.8 megahertz instead of 2, like we had here. Something to note, if you set 2 radio stations broadcasting on the same frequency and band, and they're within the same effective range, then what happens is the receivers that subscribe to the transmission will be getting the transmission or getting the Unity event for both transmitters at the same time. And so what will happen is those two transmitters will walk all over each other, and so you'll get intermittent switching back and forth between these two stations. And it won't hurt anything, but it's really annoying, and you can't really hear everything correctly that's on there. The only other component that this this has is the radio broadcast station. You can enable and disable the transmitter. You can shuffle the tracks. So if you have shuffle enabled, when it loads, it will shuffle all these tracks for you. If you don't have it shuffled or set to shuffle, then it'll just play them in their order. While the game is playing, if you turn shuffle on or you change the state of shuffle, it just won't. Like if you turn shuffle on while the game's playing, it'll reshuffle them for you. Same thing if you disable and re-enable it, it'll shuffle. The loop is just loops the entire playlist. The max playlist queue size, that's the number of tracks that it will store in memory to play from. So it'll try to download the very first track, and then it'll immediately start breaking it up into chunks and broadcasting it. But while it's doing that, it will download 3 more tracks and store those into memory in a queue, and then in their shuffled order. And then once the track that's currently playing, once its last chunk is being sent off for broadcast, then it will pop the next track off of the playlist queue and start waiting for it to broadcast. Something else to note in the background, as it's broadcasting these chunks, you can kind of think of them as packets. In this case, they're 3-second packets of audio data. While it's doing that, if it's time to send another chunk of data, but the audio source is still playing that last queue or last chunk that it had, there's also a play queue that it will store those chunks in. So there's a queue that stores chunks as well, and every time the audio source becomes available, it will pop off the next chunk in that queue and start playing it as well. So the next thing we have is our playlist. These have to be URLs, but they can be to either a file locally or a file on the internet. It has to be an OGG file, a .ogg file, because of just the nature of what Unity supports at this time. At some point in the future, I might be able to write a library that will do MP3s and stream like the streaming radio stations that you can't really download the audio track because it's infinite. It just streams forever. Also, be careful that the tracks that you put in here aren't too long, because even with the fast network, it can take some time to load these initially. Once you're playing one track, then it's loading them in the background. It's streaming them into a queue, and then you don't have a delay anymore in between tracks. Another thing too is that if you change the size of this queue at playtime, if you add tracks or remove tracks, then it will redo the shuffling algorithm so that you're not playing tracks that don't exist in this list anymore. Okay, the next guy, we have a flashlight signaler. It's this guy here, and it's in this case it's just a capsule with a spotlight in it. But you get the Morse transmitter script, and in this case we're using visual with a light. This emitter color, a standard color you can pick. Now this will also apply if you do a material. So if you selected material, then it would change the color, the primary color for that material on the game object, and then it'll just flash it back and forth between its original and whatever color you select here. Okay, and then this another Morse code auto emitter. In this case, 10 words per minute. So it's a little easier to see with the flashlight. It kind of slowed it down a little bit. A different message, but everything else is the same. Alright, so then we have our test receiver, and this guy has a UI on it that goes into a radio UI manager. So any of the sliders or the value text objects that you put in here, it will process. If you don't want included in here, if you don't want a really complex UI, if you want something that just has a channel slider or a volume slider, then just put those in here and leave everything else blank, and it won't process anything that isn't included in here. Standard thing with the radio. This one we have locked on the CB, so nothing new there. Okay, for our player, for the walkie-talkie, the handheld radio here, we have our UI component, which you can see here. We also have an input manager for keyboard, and this has, these are just the standard inputs. This particular script I'm providing, as well as a Morse input manager for Morse code. It has a push to transmit. This has the keyboard input for all the different things like you would have in here. Anything you don't include in these, it just won't process for. So if this is an empty string, if this is blank, it won't process input for that function. And these, like I said, this script just uses Unity's default that you get to, through the input. So you just define them in here, and whatever this name value is, that's what you put in the script input. The great thing about this is that the radio component just uses events for changing everything. So your volume up and down, your channel up and down, all those are Unity events. And so you can use any input manager you want. You're not locked into using the one that I provide. You're not locked into using Unity's built-in input manager. You can use anything. So there's tons of third-party input managers out there. And so all you have to do is let them do your managing, and then you just invoke the correct event for the radio component or the Morse code component, and you're good to go. So I tried to keep that nice and open for you guys. Also, speaking of open, everything is open source. So I provide all the source code in here as well. None of these modules are compiled or anything like that. You can change these things if you want, to match your needs or anything like that. That's entirely up to you. Okay, so back to the walkie-talkie. And that's pretty much it. It's got a radio. We have a transmitter and a receiver on this one. We don't really worry about the effective range on this too much. And we can set where we can select any channel, and we're going to be listening on 1.8 megahertz at first. One thing to note too, and I'll show in a later video, if you don't already have an audio source and a high-pass filter on an object, when you add the radio component, it will automatically add it and configure it for you. So it will turn off the play on awake, and it'll adjust the volume down, which I'm going to actually drop that down a little bit more because it's kind of right up in your player's ear, as it were. For Unity 5.2 and above, it also can do a custom curve that it'll try to add. If you have the older versions of Unity, it just uses the default logarithmic fall off. And then if you watch while we're playing, if you look at the cutoff frequency for the Pro version, as you move further away in distance from a transmitter, or if you move further away in channel, so from the center of the band, as you move further off from the center of the band within a specific range, then you'll get a fall off. So this high pass filter will actually apply a cutoff frequency, so you'll get some distortion. And as you get further and further away, you get more and more distorted until you eventually just go to static and you lose that channel altogether. And I'll demonstrate that as we're playing. All right, and that's pretty much it for that. So let's play. Okay, turn this up. So while there's nothing being transmitted on a channel, you hear static. So now we hear the first track.
It was about dawn this morning that the first reports came in saying that German troops were crossing the...
Okay, so now this has downloaded that track from archive.org, and it's broadcasting it over radio, and then I'm receiving it on my handheld unit here in little chunks. So some of the things to note, so I can adjust the volume here. I can change my frequency, and you'll notice when I'm off that band, and there's, out here, there's nothing transmitting on these, so I just get static. When I go over to the 2, that's where my Morse code transmitter is doing its thing. So we can hear one of these towers is broadcasting this Morse message. So also, channel is disabled because there's only one frequency range to choose from. So we're going to demonstrate some of the keyboard input here. So 1 is the volume, so I can change volume with my keyboard. For my frequency, you can do quick change, where you're just bouncing around, or if it had a longer frequency to slide between, or frequency variance, then it wouldn't go so much. But you can hold down Shift and do fine tune. So now you're hearing that fall off. And if you look here at this audio high pass filter, you can see that value change as I scroll through that frequency. All right, and so it's gone past its limit, and now you can see that all it has is a static click. So as I wander back into that, you'll see that it's switching between the dit and the dot clips for the Morse code. Excuse me. Same thing with the voice side with the radio. Okay, all right, so now we're going to do the next demonstration here. And we go up to CB, and we've got our receiver enabled or disabled. In this case, we want it enabled. You can see too here, you can scroll through it, and these frequencies are locked in because they only have one. You can adjust the volume through that. So one thing here, so we're going to go down to channel 1 again, and I'm broadcasting on channel 1 on CB. So if I use my push to transmit Morse, you can see in this case I've got the light as well as audio. So you can hear that, and that's coming through this guy here. So that's being broadcast from this hand unit to this guy here. Also, we have push to talk. So if I'm talking into this walkie-talkie and I'm going to receive it on the receiver here. So we'll get kind of an echo, but you can hear that it's coming from here. I can change my volume and have that fade off. So the frequency fade and the distance fade also work with microphone as well as the push Morse code. So all of that is tied in together, and it's just a built-in part of the asset. And that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed it. And the other videos, I'll give some demos on how to apply all these things, how to create these from scratch. And that's it. Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed it.